7th century, a new empire began to spread across the Middle East. The teachings of the Prophet Muhammad inspired a vast and powerful Islamic empire, which soon stretched from India in the east to here in Morocco in the west. And at the heart of this empire lay a vibrant intellectual culture. A great library and centre of learning was established in Baghdad. Called the House of Wisdom, its teachings spread throughout the Islamic Empire, reaching schools like this one here in Fez. Subjects studied included astronomy, medicine, chemistry, zoology, and mathematics.
The Muslim scholars collected and translated many ancient texts, effectively saving them for posterity. In fact, without their intervention, we may never have known about the ancient cultures of Egypt, Babylon, Greece and India. But the scholars at the House of Wisdom weren't content simply with translating other people's mathematics. They wanted to create a mathematics of their own, to push the subject forward.
Such intellectual curiosity was actively encouraged in the early centuries of the Islamic Empire. The Quran asserted the importance of knowledge. Learning was nothing less than a requirement of God.
In fact, the needs of Islam demanded mathematical skill. The devout needed to calculate the time of prayer and the direction of Mecca to pray towards. And the prohibition of depicting the human form meant that they had to use much more geometric patterns to cover their buildings. In fact, the Muslim artists discovered all the different sorts of symmetry that you can depict on a two-dimensional wall.
The director of the House of Wisdom in Baghdad was a Persian scholar called Muhammad al-Khwarizmi. Al-Khwarizmi was an exceptional mathematician who was responsible for introducing two key mathematical concepts to the West.
Al-Khwarizmi recognised the incredible potential that the Hindu numerals had to revolutionise mathematics and science. His work explaining the power of these numbers to speed up calculations and do things effectively was so influential that it wasn't long before they were adopted as the numbers of choice amongst the mathematicians of the Islamic world. In fact, these numbers have now become known as the Hindu Arabic numerals.
These numbers, 1 to 9 and 0, are the ones we use today all over the world. But Al-Khwarizmi was to create a whole new mathematical language. It was called algebra and was named after the title of his book, Al-Jabra wa al-Makbal, or calculation by restoration or reduction. Algebra is the grammar that underlies the way that numbers work. It's a language that explains the patterns that lie behind the behaviour of numbers. It's a bit like a code for running a computer program. The code will work whatever the numbers you feed into the program.
For example, mathematicians might have discovered that if you take a number and square it, that's always one more than if you take the numbers either side and multiply those together. For example, 5 times 5 is 25, which is one more than 4 times 6, 24. 6 times 6 is always one more than 5 times 7, and so on. But how can you be sure that this is going to work whatever numbers you take? To explain the pattern underlying these calculations, let's use the dyeing holes in this tannery.
If we take a square of 25 holes running 5 by 5 and take one row of 5 away and add it to the bottom, we get 6 by 4 with 1 left over. But however many holes there are on the side of the square, we can always move one row of holes down in a similar way to be left with a rectangle of holes with 1 left over.
Algebra was a huge breakthrough. Here was a new language to be able to analyse the way that numbers worked. Previously, the Indians and the Chinese had considered very specific problems, but Al-Khwarizmi went from the specific to the general. He developed systematic ways to be able to analyse problems so that the solutions would work whatever the numbers that you took. This language is the one that's used across the mathematical world today.
Al-Khwarizmi's great breakthrough came when he applied algebra to quadratic equations, that is, equations including numbers to the power of 2. The ancient Mesopotamians had devised a cunning method to solve particular quadratic equations. But it was Al-Khwarizmi's abstract language of algebra that could finally express why this method always worked. This was a great conceptual leap, and would ultimately lead to a formula that could be used to solve any quadratic equation, whatever the numbers involved.